You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron, live with Ethan Haristodoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Greeks Gridiron. And following what was a pretty wild and shocking weekend in the USFL, we had blowouts, we had surprising victories, teams performing better than people probably anticipated them to, considering how they performed in week number 1. There was a lot going on, and I've got to say the power rankings for this week have been flipped quite a bit on their head. A lot of movement through the boards. As we always do, I'm going from worst to first. I'll be revealing them 2 at a time. That way, by the time we get to ranks 2 and 1, it'll be a little bit of a surprise reveal together to see who ranks at the top and who missed just by a hair in that second place spot. So make sure you comment down below. Give me your thoughts and opinions on this weekend. We'll kind of recap as we go through the power rankings as well. And also let me know, what are your power rankings? Rank those teams from 8 to 1. I would love to hear what you guys are thinking about in terms of the structure of the league's power. Now, starting things off, beginning with numbers 8 and 7. We're looking at the Maulers sitting at the bottom, and then the Showboats at number 7. So this one was a lot to consider because you have the Showboats coming off of a massive loss where they got completely blown out of the water by the Stallions, and then you had a Maulers team that hung in for the majority of the game, but then ultimately just kind of crumbled at the end. My reasoning, though, for the Maulers being where I have them at number 8 is in large part because while the defense is fun to watch, it is such a good group and arguably one of the best defenses in the league, they unfortunately, on the flip side of things, have an offense that is the worst in the league, to the point where you've gone through 2 games now and you have yet to score an offensive touchdown. The lone touchdown you have this season is off of a fumble return from last week. That is not a recipe for success, and it is honestly kind of a shame because, again, this defense that you have in Pittsburgh is really, really good, led by some really big names, but you have just no offensive system at all, whether it's trying to throw the football, run the football. There's really just nothing to get excited about with Pittsburgh. And while, yeah, you can look at the Showboats and say, well, what about them? They just put up 2 points and they got blown out by like 40-something against the Stallions. Okay, fair enough, but they at least showed some semblance of an offense last week against a Philadelphia Stars team that is pretty good. And I just feel like if you can't do anything on one side of the football, you're pretty much missing half of the game at that point. If you want to get specific with including special teams, you're missing a third of the game, and a third of that game being a very important piece. I just don't really think that with a team that has 322 yards through 2 games, averaging 3.1 yards per play, can be considered anything better than number 8. As for the Showboats, we've kind of brought it up a couple of times, but I mean, if you're asking questions about what went wrong, you might as well just ask what went right, because realistically, you had one really good punt that pinned the Stallions back, and then Jeremiah Valoaga was able to come in and scoop in a safety for the defense and put up the lone 2 points that the Showboats got, and that was pretty much where the good started and finished for the Showboats. It was just an awful showing. You're allowing 7.6 yards per play. I mean, the Stallions just kind of walked all over them, and there's really not much else to say. I look at the Showboats and the Maulers as like they're in a tier at the bottom by themselves, and it's really hard to watch, at least for the Maulers. I mean, the offense is just horrendous football, and it made the Generals defense this past weekend look better than it actually was. But, and I don't want to take too much credit away from the Generals because you still put in, a solid 60 minutes of football in one, but that offense over there in Pittsburgh has to get figured out. The Showboats, I'm hoping that, they just were underprepared for this game here. And maybe the Stallions are just that good. But as far as ranking these 2 teams, I just have to go with the Showboats because simply, despite being completely whacked this week, they at least showed fight last week offensively. Now, moving into the next 2 teams at numbers 6 and number 5, we are looking at the Gamblers taking that number 6 spot and then the Generals taking the number 5 spot. So the Gamblers, basically just turnovers continuing to kill the team. Kenji Bahar had such a good game up until the final few minutes where he threw a couple of back-breaking interceptions to throw the game away, essentially. And that's such a shame because there was so much to like about what you were getting from the Gamblers this week. And a recurring theme from last year, and this was something I talked about a lot, I felt like every single week when I was reviewing the Gamblers, and it's kind of rearing its ugly head again. You have either the offense or the defense showing up to games. And last year it was more the defense than the offense, but this happened fairly frequently where either one side of the football or the other showed up for the game and the other side did not. Whereas last week, you didn't have any real offense going for you. A lot of mistakes, a lot of things holding you back, and the defense kind of wasn't really doing much. Whereas this week, defense still, not really doing too much, I guess you could say, but ultimately the offense was there as well. So it's one of those things where the offense is there, but the defense wasn't. Last week, it was kind of a bit of both, but the defense, I would say last week more so just kind of they just eventually bent over because they were so stressed from carrying the weight of the load. So I don't want to discredit the defense too much for what they did last week, but it just feels like this team cannot get both sides of the ball going, but there are some positives. I want to sit here and just rag negatively. I will say Pledger continues to do an excellent job in the absence of Mark Thompson. I don't know where he is and why he's not playing. I'm assuming he's hurt, but you're looking at 18 carries for 94 yards and a touchdown, 5.2 yards a clip, plus a couple of catches for 26 yards. You have to feel pretty good about that. If Kenji Bahar can just stop turning the football over, this Gamblers team, I think, can be really good. Defense kind of has to sort itself out after this past week, but I saw some promise from them the week prior, and if the offense can do again what they did this past week against the Breakers, focus on a sound running game, try not to put Kenji Bahar in a situation where he feels like he has to throw the entire team on his back, and I could see this Gamblers team competing. It's just a matter of cleaning up the turnovers. That's really all they have to do right now. As for the Generals, this is very clearly not the Generals of 2022. The offense is not nearly as potent, and obviously you lost some pieces there. Kavonte Turpin being the MVP of the season last year being a massive loss and one that's very easy to recognize. However, there is some hope. Darius Victor is still an excellent running back. He's still keeping a little bit of light there at the end of the tunnel for this offense. Hopefully they can sort things out. I really, really wish that they would just stop with the QB system. I feel like it was more attractive last year because the Generals, and I guess they're kind of starting out the same way they did last year. They lost to the Stallions, and then they went on and won 9 games in a row. So, I guess we'll have to see if that ends up being the case again. I just hate the 2-quarterback system. I don't even care who you go with. Just pick one or the other. It's so ugly, and I just feel like it leads to issues. I just want to see one quarterback get the shot to run the show and stop feeling like they have to keep looking over there. Because I feel like that's part of the issue too. Feeling like you're going to get pulled at any moment's notice because something isn't looking good or something isn't going well or you made a mistake here or there. It just is not good for the position that is the quarterback. You want to have your coach and your team believe in you as the guy, and I don't think the dual QB system really works. The Generals were just lucky that they had an influx of talent last year that really helped catapult them as far as they went. But I think with a team that may not be quite as talented as last year, don't know how it's going to look. And I think you're going to hear a lot more noise about it this year if struggles offensively continue. Whereas the Generals last year, because you had so many playmakers, offense was really, really good. And then big fourth quarter by the D. I wanted to make sure I shouted them out here because like I mentioned, going up against, they had an opportunity here to essentially, again, you're in a slogfest with the Maulers. It was not pretty by any means, but you had an opportunity where you're going up against an inferior offense to your defense, and you made some plays when it mattered most to put the game away. So I do want to credit them for that. Like I said, I don't want to discredit the Maulers for that game, but there is a piece of that performance that I think has to do with just how poor the Maulers are. Hopefully, things get a little bit better, but kind of on the fence with the Generals right now. But I like them as the best of the worst. Going into the next 2 teams here, that we're looking at numbers 4 and number 3 now, and I'm curious to see what people start to think about these because I feel like it's a top end that's getting a little more hard to kind of pick out and determine where everyone should be ranked here. At number 4, we're looking at the Philadelphia Stars, and then at number 3, the New Orleans Breakers. So the Philadelphia Stars, for me, dropping from number 1 to number 4. This was a concerning loss. 1, because the offense was completely shut down, and 2, I'm really worried about Case Cookus and his knee. He looked like he was in a lot of pain and he was really hurt. And I would, even during the game, I'm just thinking, man, I understand you want to win this game, but you're down 2 scores with not a ton of time left. Just, get out of the game. It's chalk it up to a loss. You still have the whole season to play through. But instead, he got crushed to the very end. The fumble at the end of the game where he got, taken down that one final time. I wish that somebody kind of stepped in on that one and was like, hey, we're going to pull you. I don't want you getting, that was kind of an irresponsible thing from the coaching staff, in my opinion. I understand, egos and whatnot, and being the quarterback, you don't want to be pulled out. But at some point, somebody needs to step in and be like, listen, man, we want you for the long haul. Let's try to avoid this injury. Offensive line looked good for like 2 drives. I even mentioned something about it on Twitter. And then right after that tweet, it was all downhill from there. Could not stop a nosebleed. The Panthers' defensive pressure was unbelievable all game long. That defensive front over there in Michigan is phenomenal, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I was really, really impressed by how good the Panthers were able to overwhelm the offensive line that looked really, really good last week. 4 turnovers and a lack of running attack is really where I kind of look at the big issues for this one. You turn the ball over as many times as you do, and it feels like the Stars just kind of forgot that you have a good couple of running backs. And maybe it was because you're having a hard time, but you can't just kind of like give up on the running game. You have to, at some point, keep defenses honest. And it felt like towards the end of the game where you're down 2 scores, but you feel like the Stars are playing like they're down 4 or something. And you start kind of abandoning the run game to throw the football, and the defense knows what they're doing. Their DNs and even the interior guys too. The edge rushers and the interior guys. They're all starting to tee off on your quarterback because they know what you're doing. It just felt like the offense became too predictable towards the end, and that's ultimately kind of what shut things down completely for the Stars. But we'll see where they go from here. That was a jarring loss, I would say. Not quite as jarring as a Showboats getting completely dog-walked, but that was not the game I was expecting. I was expecting a higher scoring affair, shootout type thing. And this Panthers team, again, we'll talk about them in a second, looks really good. And for them to have done what they did to the Stars, I think speaks volumes to where they are as a team right now. As for the Breakers, the defense, not looking great, but it showed up when it mattered the most, making a couple of big plays for some turnovers late in the 4th quarter. 3 interceptions on the day, 2 on the Gamblers' final 2 drives, which was massive for the victory here. The Breakers have been struggling to stop the run so far this year. That's something that we've seen now 2 weeks in a row. They're averaging about 4 yards per carry allowed. That's not a recipe for success defensively. You got to figure out how to slow down these teams on the ground because there are some really good running backs in this league. Like if you're going up against the Panthers, Reggie Corbin just had an absolute day. And then again, the Generals have a really good running back. There are a handful of really good running backs in this league. I could sit here and name them all. There's a bunch of really good running backs in this league. I feel like that's a recurring theme with each and every single team for the most part. You need to figure out how to stop these running backs because you can't count on having these shootout victories every single week. Obviously, it wasn't last week, but you can't count on the fact that, you're going to just be able to outpass everyone because you have an experienced quarterback in McLeod Bethel-Thompson. Like, yes, he's really good, had a really steady game, 251 yards, couple of touchdowns, didn't really put the ball in any bad positions, but you need to have some semblance of a run defense at some point. And when you're averaging nearly 5 yards a carry, that's a problem. I also want to shout out tight end Sage Surratt and running back Wes Hills, both of them deserving all the praise in the world. It feels like tight ends are starting to emerge this year. Like teams are starting to scheme up the tight ends a little bit more, and I really like that. I think we're getting to see a little bit more variety from some of these offenses this year, and it's really exciting to watch. But Sage Surratt, 11 catches, 121 yards, and a touchdown. And running back Wes Hills, a lot of people were giving Surratt all the praise for how dominant he was, and I feel like Wes Hills didn't quite get the love he deserved. He had 18 carries, 110 yards, 6.1 yard per carry average. That's ludicrous for a running back. 3 touchdowns on the day. Shout out to Wes Hills, man. You deserve all the flowers and then some. And then as for the top 2 teams in the USFL, where I'm sure a lot of you have been kind of sitting here waiting to see what I have to say, who ranks at number 2? Who ranks at number 1? Who takes the throne after week number 2? Coming in at the number 2 spot, is going to be the Michigan Panthers. And then at number 1, we have the defending champion Birmingham Stallions. I really considered the Panthers for number 1. I want to say that immediately for those of you that were maybe hoping to see the Panthers at number 1. I really did, because that defense has been more impressive than anything else that I've seen by that unit. The interior of that D-line in Michigan is going to be a problem for teams to deal with, especially if O-lines can't catch up to that quick enough. It is going to be problematic. The defense has been just unbelievable. You have 23 points allowed in just the last 2 games that they've played here. 8 sacks in the last 2 games as well. The corners are doing an excellent job staying on their guys. Like, yes, there's a play or 2 here and there happening, but they're doing a really good job of staying close to their players, making, or their wide receivers, making really good defending plays. I am really impressed by everything that we're seeing from the defense. The offense looks good too. Josh Love did have his mistakes though. A kind of a comeback down to earth moment, I think I would say, for him after getting, player of the week honors on the offense and all that last week. A little bit of a comeback down to earth moment, but the Panthers did exactly what I said they needed to do if they wanted to be successful and win this game, which was obviously make life difficult for Case Cookus. But the other thing was to lean on their running game and Reggie Corbin. Don't come into this game trying to throw the ball all over the world just because it worked really well last week. And that's exactly what they did. Reggie Corbin, averaging almost 12 yards per carry, had 2 touchdowns and 140 yards total on the day between rushing and receiving. He is the guy. This Panthers team is legit. As long as you commit to the balanced attack that you have, it's very clear that the Panthers are really good up front on both the offense and the defensive side of the ball. I would say better on the defense than the offense, but when it comes to those lines, really, really good over there. And I feel like a lot of people forget that a lot of good comes when you have really good big men up front on both sides of the football. Very clear they have a lot of talent there. I would like to see a wide receiver really, aside from like Trey Quinn, who's looking pretty good, but that's not really surprising considering how much time he spent in the NFL. But I want to see like a legit bona fide number 1 receiver come and like into like fruition for the Panthers here. And maybe it is Trey Quinn, but like Joe Walker, my goodness, the amount of drops he had in that game. I think it was like 4 drops alone in the first half. I heard the commentator say that or something along those lines. Ridiculous. But the Panthers have shown that they are the team to beat, I would say, right now in the North Division. And I don't know if it's very close right now. After what they did to the Stars, I feel like it's the Panthers and then the rest of the North kind of trying to figure themselves out here. As for the defending champs, the Birmingham Stallions, I don't really think after their first 2 performances of the year, you can really sit there and argue too much against them. Like, yes, do I think the Panthers have somewhat of an argument? Absolutely. But I look at the Stallions as the legit team of the USFL right now. I mean, what more can you possibly praise them about than just everything that they've done? They're firing on all cylinders. Magoo has been phenomenal in replacing Jamar Smith. He had 75% completion, 301 yards, 4 touchdowns. He had 32 on the ground as well. A lot of people worried about, not a lot of people, but there were worries about, how does this offense look minus Jamar Smith and his athleticism? But Alex Magoo has shown that he does have legs and he can wheel and deal, whether it's with his arm or with his legs as well. So you're not seeing a ton of turnover with like the scheme or anything like that. Nothing really had to change with Magoo stepping in, which is really good for the offense. Jace Sternberger, 5 catches, 127 yards, a touchdown, another tight end showing up and showing some real success here early in the season. And then you look at the running back duo that they have there, a combined 140 yards and 2 touchdowns between Zaquandre White and CJ Marable. I mean, you can throw the football, you can run the football. The defense, 3 sacks. They forced a couple of turnovers. It was like punt, turnover, missed field goal, punt, whatever it was for the Showboats. I mean, the defense was just shutting them down left and right. The amount of just like 3, 4, or 5 play drives that the Showboats had because of how good the Stallions defense is looking. And this is all on top and compounded on the fact that they came into this game with 18 potential people on the injury report or something. I remember I made my picks Friday, afternoon or something like that. And then the injury list came out for the Stallions. And I was like, oh my God, this is going to be horrible. I was like, I chalked that up to a loss immediately when I saw that. Because I was like, how is this team going to survive with all of these injuries? And then sure enough, doesn't even matter. You come in, the lone points you gave up was a safety. And I mean, you were pinned in your own end zone practically when that happened. You were 9 yards out at most when you started the drive. chalk it up to a couple of mistakes, but if there's one criticism you can have about the Stallions at this point in the season, it's the fact that they allowed up a cheeky safety at one point in a game against the Showboats. But I mean, the Stallions have just been, without question, the best team in the USFL through 2 weeks. It has been very impressive what they're doing, despite all the injuries they dealt with and losing Jamar Smith last week. Hats off to this team, because not only do they have an excellent starting core of players, but their depth is unbelievable as well. The amount of guys that are just stepping up and, filling in holes as necessary wherever is needed and playing at a high level too is not something you see too often in football as a whole. So that Birmingham Stallions team is absolutely loaded. And if they're not the favorite right now for the South, I don't know how you're making that argument. But that is how I'm looking at the power rankings for following week number 2. Again, I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe button so you don't miss out on all the USFL and NFL content I got coming along as we roll through the season and off season respectively. But if you made it to the end of the video, I appreciate you. I will see you all next time. Have a good one.